All right, diving in today, we're going deep with Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. You guys have those excerpts handy.
Oh, absolutely. Peter Thiel, kind of legend, right? I mean, PayPal, Palantir,
Yeah.
early investor in like Facebook, SpaceX, seems to know what's coming next.
Yeah, and 0 to 1 is kind of his playbook for, well, building that future, right? Not just starting any old business, but actually creating something new. The world's kind of obsessed with copying, you know?
For sure.
But Thiel says going from like 1 to N, that's just globalization. But going from 0 to 1, that's the real leap, the thing that changes everything.
Yeah, right from the start, Thiel throws down this question. Is progress just copying, what already works? Or is it about making something totally new and different? He calls them horizontal and vertical progress.
So horizontal progress would be like what China's been doing, right? Basically copying the West's model for manufacturing and development.
Exactly. And it's led to crazy growth, right? But Thiel's point is it might hit a ceiling. We don't have infinite resources on this planet, so just copying what we already do won't solve those big, hairy problems.
Right.
Like climate change, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where vertical progress comes in. That's technology. It's about doing things that have never been done before.
Okay, and that's where startups come in. They're not just mini-me versions of big companies. They're meant to be these like engines of vertical progress. But here's where things get a little crazy. Thiel actually argues that monopolies can be good, like essential for progress.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of everything we've been taught, right?
Yeah. We're trained to think competition is king, survival of the fittest, all that. But Thiel kind of flips the script. He's talking about creative monopolies, the ones that bring something genuinely new to the table. He says they benefit everyone eventually. Think about it. They're the ones with the resources to really invest in those big risky innovations that smaller companies just can't swing,
It's like when Apple came out with the iPhone. It wasn't the first smartphone, but it was so much better than anything else out there. It basically created its own category.
Totally.
People paid a premium for it because, well, it actually worked. And that gave Apple the fuel to keep innovating, right?
Exactly. Those monopoly profits, as Thiel calls them, they're the reward for making something truly valuable. It's the incentive to solve those big, thorny problems.
Okay, so if monopolies can be a good thing, does that mean competition is always bad?
Well, Thiel's not saying to avoid competition entirely. But he makes this really interesting point that this ideology of competition that we're all raised with can be a trap, actually.
How so?
Well, it forces you to focus on beating your rivals instead of building something unique. It's remember applying to college.
Ugh, don't remind me. The endless resume padding, the crazy pressure to get into the best school, whatever that even means.
Right.
I spent so much time trying to be better than everyone else that I totally forgot to ask myself, what did I actually want to learn?
Right. Exactly. That's a classic example of how competition leads to conformity, playing it safe. Thiel also points to the rivalry between Oracle and Siebel Systems back in the 90s. They were so busy trying to destroy each other, they totally lost sight of making good software.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if this cutthroat mentality is the wrong way to go, what's the alternative? Thiel's really big on playing the long game, right?
Yeah, he seems to think that's key.
Instead of chasing those quick wins, he says, building a company that lasts, one that could become that creative monopoly that requires a different approach.
Huh.
He actually uses this chess analogy, focus on making the last great move in your market, not the first.
So don't just play the game, design the end game.
Exactly. He's got these 4 characteristics of companies that tend to win in the long run. Proprietary technology, network effects, economies of scale, and branding.
Okay, break those down for us. Proprietary technology seems pretty straightforward. You got to have something that's way better than the competition, right?
Right.
Like Google's search algorithm, it was so good it basically wiped everyone else out.
Yeah, exactly. And Thiel even says it needs to be 10 times better to really give you an edge. Then you've got network effects. So the more people use your product, the more valuable it becomes for everyone.
Right. Facebook is a perfect example. Each new user makes the whole platform more appealing, more useful.
For sure. And then there are economies of scale. The bigger you get, the cheaper it gets to produce each unit.
Right. That makes sense.
Especially true in software, where copying it basically costs nothing. And finally, you've got branding. That creates a certain image, a lifestyle. People will pay more for your product even if there are cheaper options.
Like Again, with Apple, people buy into the whole ecosystem.
Totally.
So Thiel's argument is that building a company with these characteristics, that's how you lay the foundation for lasting impact. Not just a quick buck, but, what about luck? Surely that plays a role, right? Thiel doesn't seem to think it's that big of a deal.
He really doesn't. He talks about this idea of definite optimism, right?
Okay.
It's this belief that the future isn't just like preordained.
Yeah.
It's something we shape, through planning and effort. And he contrasts that with like indefinite optimism.
Which is just kind of hoping things will work out.
Right, like hoping things will magically get better without any real plan. He's not into that hope for the best mentality.
He even brings up those massive engineering projects from the mid-20th century, like the Reber plan to reshape San Francisco Bay, as examples of definite optimism in action. These were bold, ambitious projects that people believed they could achieve,
Totally, yeah. It's an interesting comparison. Thiel's kind of saying we've lost that boldness, that willingness to tackle those really big challenges.
Almost like we've become too cynical, maybe, too afraid to fail.
Yeah. But he's also wary of definite pessimism.
Yeah.
That belief that the future's just doomed, so why even bother? He sees that in, China's rapid development. They're almost desperately trying to develop as fast as they can.
Because they think they're running out of time.
Right, they think they're heading towards this, resource crunch. So it's about finding that balance, I guess, between naive hope and paralyzing pessimism. We got to believe a better future is possible and have a solid plan to get there.
Which brings us to another one of Thiel's favorite topics, secrets.
Oh, yeah, he loves those.
He's kind of obsessed, right?
He is. For Thiel, secrets are these, valuable insights about the world that most people just don't see. They're hidden truths that can give you an edge, an advantage.
He even talks about the monopoly secret, this idea that competition and capitalism are actually opposites. Monopolies create new value while competition destroys it.
It's like he's saying the West companies are built around these secrets, They're these conspiracies to change the world.
Now, building a world-changing company obviously takes a great team. But what makes a team truly great, according to Thiel?
Well, it's more than just hiring a bunch of geniuses, right?
Yeah.
He's really big on shared mission, and strong relationships. He talks about his experience building the PayPal Mafia as an example. They were incredibly talented, but they were also really aligned on the company's goals, and they genuinely liked working together.
It's like the best teams are built on that foundation of trust, respect, and shared purpose.
Yeah, for sure. And, he has some pretty out there views on compensation, especially for CEOs.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
He thinks early-stage CEOs shouldn't be making millions, He argues that high pay incentivizes them to just, protect what they've got instead of pushing for growth.
So they get more focused on keeping their cushy job than taking the risks to build something new.
Exactly. And he thinks low CEO pay sets a tone for the whole company. Everyone's in this together, working towards that common goal. He actually recommends a CEO salary cap of $150,000 a year, which is
pretty radical, especially these days.
It is. It's a big departure from that, pay CEOs millions mentality that a lot of companies have. But Thiel says equity. That's the real motivator.
Because it aligns everyone's interests in the long-term success of the company. Makes sense.
Right. He's also really big on allocating that equity carefully. Based on contributions and what people are giving up to be there, those opportunity costs, and keep those details confidential to avoid internal drama.
Smart. So we've got the mission, the team, the right incentives. Now, how do we get this amazing product out into the world? It seems like distribution is kind of an afterthought sometimes, especially in tech. There's this myth that a great product will sell itself. But Thiel doesn't buy that at all, does he?
Nope. He completely dismantles that myth. He says distribution is just as crucial as the product itself. And that includes everything, from sales and marketing to customer service. You could have the most amazing product ever, but if no one knows about it, what's the point?
Yeah, makes sense. So how does he break down this whole distribution thing?
He's got these 4 main categories: complex sales, personal sales, marketing, and viral marketing. It's like a whole toolkit for getting your product out there.
Okay, so complex sales, what's that about?
That's like building deep relationships with a few high-value customers, like how SpaceX operates, Big contracts, government deals, things like that.
Gotcha. And then personal sales, is that more about volume?
Yeah, it's about building relationships with a lot of smaller customers, kind of like what Box did in the early days, direct sales, building those one-on-one connections.
Okay, and marketing, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? Reaching the masses through advertising, social media, all that.
Yeah. And then there's viral marketing, which is about like word of mouth, leveraging those social connections, having your users spread the word. Think about like Facebook or PayPal back in the day. Their early growth was all about users inviting their friends.
It's like building that network effect right from the start.
Exactly. And Thiel points out that each approach has its own pluses and minuses. The key is figuring out which one is right for your product, your target market.
So you're saying it's not about trying to do everything at once, it's about focusing on the one channel that really works for you.
Totally. And he even says sometimes you got to be the salesperson yourself, especially in the early days.
Roll up your sleeves and get out there.
Yep. It's not always glamorous, but it's essential.
All this talk about distribution and reaching customers, it makes me think about the role of technology. A lot of people are worried that computers are going to replace human workers. Thiel seems to have a different take on this, though.
He does. He argues that computers aren't necessarily substitutes for humans. He sees them more as, like, complements. They're good at different things. And we could achieve a lot more by working together.
So it's not about man versus machine. It's about man with machine.
Exactly. He uses PayPal's fraud detection system as an example. They combine the pattern-finding abilities of computers with the judgment and intuition of human analysts to get much better results than either could alone.
It's like a perfect partnership, leveraging the strengths of each.
Right. It's a great example of how human-machine collaboration can be super powerful, even in areas where people assume computers will just, like, take over eventually.
Right. So it's not about fearing the robots. It's about figuring out how to work with them, how to leverage their strengths while still retaining our own unique human capabilities.
Exactly. And Thiel thinks the most valuable companies in the future will be built by entrepreneurs who understand that.
This all makes me think back to those clean tech companies we were talking about earlier. They were trying to solve a real problem, a really important problem, but so many of them failed. What can we learn from their mistakes, according to Thiel?
He uses the clean tech bubble as like this cautionary tale about the dangers of indefinite optimism and asking the right questions before you launch a business.
Right, because having a great idea isn't enough, is it? You need to have a solid plan, a realistic assessment of the market, and the ability to execute that plan.
Exactly. And he lays out these 7 key questions that every entrepreneur needs to answer. Timing, team, monopoly, durability, distribution, engineering, and secrets.
Okay, let's dive into those. Timing, that seems pretty crucial. Like, is now actually the right moment for this particular business?
Yeah, a lot of those clean tech companies launched before the technology was really ready, so they were too early to market.
It's like they had the right idea, but at the wrong time.
Totally. And then there's the team question. Do you actually have the right people to build this thing?
Right, the dream team.
Exactly. A lot of those clean tech companies didn't have experienced leaders and engineers, which really held them back.
They had the passion, but maybe not the practical expertise.
Right. And then you have the monopoly question. Are you starting with a big share of a small market?
That's one of Thiel's key principles, right? Finding that niche where you can dominate.
Exactly. A lot of those clean tech companies were in these crowded markets with very similar products. It was hard for them to stand out.
So they were competing on price instead of innovation.
Right. Then there's the question of durability. Will your market position be defensible 10 or 20 years from now?
Because the world changes fast. What's hot today could be obsolete tomorrow.
Totally. A lot of those clean tech companies were vulnerable to being disrupted, either by new tech or changes in government policy.
Like the rug could be pulled out from under them at any moment.
Yeah. And of course, there's distribution, which we just talked about.
Yeah.
Do you actually have a plan to get your product out there to reach those customers?
Because even the best product in the world won't succeed if no one knows about it.
Right. A lot of those clean tech companies struggled to actually get their products into the market, even when the tech itself was promising.
It's like they were so focused on building it, they forgot about selling it.
Exactly. And then there's the engineering question. Can you create breakthrough technology? Not just like incremental improvements.
You got to push the boundaries, right?
Right. A lot of those clean tech companies overestimated their ability to innovate and ended up with like mediocre tech.
Not enough to really disrupt the market. Okay, and finally, the secret question. Have you found that unique opportunity that everyone else is missing?
Right. Like, are you actually solving a real problem? Or are you just chasing a trend? A lot of those clean tech companies were chasing trends, which made them really vulnerable to those market shifts.
So it's about digging deeper, finding those hidden truths, those secrets that Thiel keeps talking about.
Exactly. And he points to Tesla as a company that basically aced all those questions.
Right. They had the breakthrough product, the strong team, a vision for the future, and they really nailed distribution and branding.
And they also got lucky, right? Like those government subsidies that were available for a limited time. It's like everything aligned for them.
So Thiel's not saying Tesla's success is like a recipe to follow, but it's definitely a good example of how to get things right.
For sure. There's no like one-size-fits-all formula for success. Every company's got its own path, its own challenges and opportunities. But asking those key questions can help you avoid those common pitfalls that tripped up so many of those clean tech companies.
It's like, do your homework right. Make sure you're building something people actually want and that you have a realistic plan to get it to them.
Totally.
Now, all this talk about Tesla and clean tech and the future of technology, it makes me think about those people who are driving these innovations, the founders themselves. Thiel has a lot to say about what makes them tick, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He points out that a lot of founders have these like extreme personalities. They're outsiders, misfits, rebels. He even mentions that several of the PayPal founders had like built bombs in high school.
Whoa, okay, that's not your typical resume builder. But I guess it kind of speaks to his point about founders being unconventional, right? Thinking differently.
Exactly. He's not saying you should go out and do illegal stuff, but there's something about that willingness to, like, think outside the box.
Yeah.
To push boundaries, to challenge the status quo.
So it's not about following the rules, it's about making your own rules.
Yeah, kind of. And Thiel talks about how founders are often, like, both celebrated and demonized, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're either heroes or villains, depending on who you ask. He uses Howard Hughes, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs as examples. They all had incredible success, but also faced a lot of criticism, a lot of scrutiny.
It's like they can't be one without the other.
Right. And Thiel calls this the founder's paradox. It's part of what makes them so fascinating.
Yeah, and so important.
They're essential for pushing things forward, for progress.
Yeah.
But they also tend to attract a lot of controversy. So it's a tricky balance.
It is, and it raises an interesting question. If founders are so important and they often have these, these extreme personalities, how do we find more of them? And like, how do we cultivate that kind of thinking, that founder's mindset in ourselves?
Well, Thiel suggests creating a culture that encourages risk-taking, challenges conventional wisdom, and celebrates being different.
It's like creating a space where it's okay to like be weird, to think differently, to have those crazy ideas.
Exactly. He also talks about the importance of mentors, finding those people who can inspire you, guide you, and help you navigate all the ups and downs of building something new.
Because at the end of the day, it's those risk takers, those founders, those who are willing to go from 0 to 1, who are going to shape the future.
Exactly.
So we're talking about founders, right? There's like almost mythical figures who create something from nothing. But what about the world they're trying to build? Thiel doesn't exactly sugarcoat things here, He lays out this pretty stark choice between stagnation and what he calls the technological singularity.
Yeah, it's like this fork in the road, right?
Yeah.
For humanity. One path leads to a future where progress kind of slows down, maybe even stops completely. And the other path leads to like this future of super fast technological advancement, a future that's almost like impossible to imagine right now.
And it's not just a simple good future, bad future thing either, right? Mm-hmm. Thiel actually breaks down stagnation into a few different possibilities, each one a little bleaker than the last.
Yeah, so first you've got recurrent collapse. It's kind of like a cycle of boom and bust, periods of progress followed by decline.
So we make some progress, but then something happens and we get pulled back down.
Exactly. Like what happened with the dot-com bubble and even that clean tech bubble we were talking about.
Right, so it's like innovation happens in these bursts, but we never really escape that cycle.
Yeah, one step forward, two steps back.
Not exactly a happy ending.
Nope. And then there's plateau. So we hit a wall, basically. Technological innovation stops, economic growth stops. We might maintain our current standard of living, but there's no real forward momentum.
So we just kind of plateau. It's like we settle into this like, future, not terrible, but not great either. Just kind of there.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, there's the most pessimistic scenario, extinction. Thiel doesn't dwell on it too much, but he acknowledges it's a possibility, if we don't solve those really big existential threats, like climate change, nuclear war, things like that.
Okay, so those stagnation scenarios are pretty grim. Let's talk about the other side of the coin. Singularity. What does that future actually look like?
Well, he describes it as like this period of radical technological advancement, a point where progress accelerates so fast that it basically changes everything about human civilization.
It completely transforms everything.
Yeah, we might even like transcend the limitations of our own biology, create a world of abundance, prosperity for everyone.
It sounds pretty utopian, but also like a little hard to wrap your head around.
It is. But Thiel's point is we shouldn't just dismiss it as like science fiction. He looks at the exponential growth we're seeing in computing power, artificial intelligence, all these other technologies, and he sees it as evidence that we're headed towards something really big.
Thiel's a big believer in that exponential growth curve, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. He argues that we often underestimate its power because our brains are wired to think linearly. We see straight lines, but technology often advances in curves, so it kind of sneaks up on us.
So to reach singularity, do we just need to find the right technology and then ride that exponential growth curve? Like, is it that simple?
Well, that's part of it, but Thiel also talks about human agency.
Right.
We have a choice, right? Like, we can just kind of sit back and let stagnation happen, or we can actively work towards something better.
So it's not just about hoping for the best, it's about actively building that future.
Exactly. And there's this whole community of like entrepreneurs, investors, technologists who call themselves singularitarians. They believe this future is not only possible, but that we kind of have a moral obligation to try to make it happen.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, it's not just about technological progress, it's also about a shift in mindset.
Yeah. Like we got to believe it's possible before we can actually build it.
So what can we do, like, as individuals to contribute to that kind of future? Is it just about, investing in the right tech companies?
Thiel thinks it starts with like changing the way we think. We got to think for ourselves, question everything. Look for those hidden truths, those secrets he talks about. Don't just accept the conventional wisdom, especially if it's pointing towards stagnation.
So be skeptical, but not cynical.
Exactly. Be open to new ideas, to new possibilities. He also talks about building strong relationships, finding mentors, surrounding yourself with people who share your vision.
Because the biggest things are rarely achieved by individuals working alone, right? It's about finding your tribe, your people.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's interesting, right? Thiel, this guy who's built billion-dollar companies, keeps coming back to these very human elements, relationships, mentorship, shared purpose. It's not just about the technology. It's about the people behind it and why they're building it.
It's about that human connection.
Yeah, and that's what makes his perspective so compelling, I think. He's able to connect those big ideas about the future with that very human desire to create, to connect, to make a difference in the world. And he doesn't shy away from the fact that, the people who drive innovation, those founders we've been talking about, they often have these unconventional personalities. He even uses the term founder's paradox to describe this tension, right?
Right. It's that push and pull between like thinking differently, challenging the status quo, and then also needing to, lead a company, manage people, deal with all the practical realities of running a business.
Totally. So you've got these brilliant, visionary, maybe even eccentric people who see the world in a different way and are able to create something truly new. But then they also need to be able to build a team, to manage people, to deal with all the complexities of the real world.
It's like, how do you balance that creative genius with the practical skills needed to actually build and run a successful company?
Right. And Thiel doesn't pretend there's some easy answer. He says there's no like one-size-fits-all approach to being a successful founder.
Right, because everyone's different. Everyone's got their own strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. But he does offer some really interesting insights into their mindset. He uses examples like Howard Hughes, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, these complex figures who achieved extraordinary things but also had their share of flaws and struggles.
He's not trying to romanticize the idea of a founder, is he? Like, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Right. He's careful not to romanticize the founder myth. He points out that these figures, for all their brilliance, they were also human beings, right? With their own contradictions and vulnerabilities.
Right. It's like those classic myths about heroes. They always have that fatal flaw, that weakness that makes them human.
Totally. Hughes became a recluse. Gates had those antitrust lawsuits.
Yeah.
Jobs was known for being, really difficult to work with. Their stories aren't these simple, straightforward tales of triumph.
Yeah, there were a lot of bumps along the way.
Definitely. And that's important to remember, right? Because it reminds us that innovation isn't always pretty. It can be disruptive. It can be messy. It can even have unintended consequences.
Right. It's not always a smooth upward trajectory.
Exactly. But I think Thiel's point is that we shouldn't shy away from that complexity. We got to embrace the fact that the people who create new things are often the ones who are willing to, break the rules, think differently, challenge the status quo.
Right. They're the ones who aren't afraid to push the boundaries, to take risks, to maybe even fail spectacularly.
Exactly. And that's ultimately what makes 0 to 1 such a thought-provoking book. It challenges our assumptions about progress, about technology, about the whole nature of innovation.
It's not a how-to manual, is it? It's more like a philosophical exploration.
Totally. It's a call to action to think bigger, be bolder, and strive for something truly new. And for Thiel, that starts with changing our mindset from indefinite optimism to definite optimism. We got to believe a better future is possible, but we also need to have a concrete plan to make it happen. He challenges us to ask ourselves, what kind of future do I want to build? And what am I going to do to make it happen?
So it's not enough to just hope for the best. We actually have to roll up our sleeves and, get to work, make it happen.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of our role in shaping the world we want to live in. It's about moving beyond passive observation and becoming active participants in creating the future. And it's about embracing the unknown, taking risks, experimenting, failing, learning from those failures. It's about embracing that journey from 0 to 1.
One of the things I find so interesting about Thiel's book is that it really challenges our assumptions about, just about everything, progress, technology,
right?
Even ourselves.
Yeah. It pushes you to think bigger, be bolder, question those narratives we're often fed about the future, to consider alternative possibilities.
And to create that better future, Thiel says we need to actively choose definite optimism over indefinite optimism. We need to believe a better future is possible and have a concrete plan to get there.
Right. He's challenging us to ask ourselves, what kind of future do I want to build? And more importantly, what am I going to do to make it happen? It's about taking ownership of our role in shaping the world we want to live in. It's about moving beyond, passive observation and becoming active participants in creating the future.
It's about being the change you want to see, right?
Exactly. And it's about embracing the unknown, taking risks, experimenting, failing, learning from those failures. It's about embracing that whole journey from 0 to 1.
Thiel ends the book with this really interesting question. He says, if the greatest danger for a founder is to believe their own myth, what about the danger of not believing in any myths at all?
Whoa, yeah. It's like he's turning the whole thing on its head. Could too much skepticism, too much cynicism actually be what's holding us back? Mm-hmm. Could a healthy dose of belief, even in the face of uncertainty, be what we need to actually make progress?
It's a really interesting question. It makes you think about the role of belief, of faith, in driving progress.
Yeah. And it's not just about business either. It kind of speaks to something deeper about human nature, I think. Like our need for stories, for meaning, for purpose.
And it challenges us to find that balance, doesn't it, between healthy skepticism and that belief in the possibility of something truly extraordinary. It's about holding on to that sense of wonder, that spark of imagination that lets us see a better future and then go out and build it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's we need a little bit of that founder spirit in all of us, you know, that willingness to dream big, to believe in those things that seem impossible, but also to be aware of those pitfalls, right? That fine line between genius and, madness.
Right. It's a tricky balance. And Thiel doesn't really give us any easy answers. But I think the point is to wrestle with those big questions.
Yeah.
The ones that challenge our assumptions about the world and our place in it.
And this whole conversation has really got me thinking about, those stories we tell ourselves about progress and innovation. It's often all about celebrating those big names, right?
Oh, yeah.
The Elon Musks, the Steve Jobses. But Thiel's perspective adds another layer to it, don't you think?
Absolutely. He's not afraid to acknowledge that it's messy, that there are contradictions. Those founders, as brilliant and visionary as they were also, deeply flawed individuals.
It's like those classic myths about heroes, right? They always have that fatal flaw, that weakness that makes them human.
Exactly. Hughes became a recluse. Gates had those antitrust lawsuits. Jobs was known for being, kind of ruthless. Their stories aren't just these simple, straightforward, and then they succeeded kind of things.
Yeah, there were definitely some bumps along the road. And I think that's important, right? Because it reminds us that innovation, it's not always pretty. It can disrupt things. It can be messy. It can even have these unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's just like anything powerful, right? There's potential for good and bad. But Thiel's point, I think, is that we shouldn't be afraid of that. We need to kind of like lean into that complexity.
Embrace the messiness of it all.
Right. And understand that the people who create new things are often the ones who, break the rules, think differently, challenge the status quo. And that's what makes 0 to 1 so interesting, I think. It challenges the way we think about progress, about technology, about like how innovation actually happens.
It's not a how-to manual. It's more like a philosophy book.
Totally. It's a call to action, to think bigger, be bolder, strive for something truly new.
And for Thiel, all of that starts with shifting our mindset, right? From indefinite optimism to definite optimism. Believing a better future is possible, but also having a plan to make it happen.
All right, he leaves us with this challenge. What kind of future do I want to build? And then how can I contribute to creating that future? It's not enough to just like hope for the best. It's about stepping up and taking responsibility.
Taking action, making it happen.
Yeah. And that's a powerful message, I think.
Yeah.
Especially in a world that often feels really overwhelming, with all the complexity and the uncertainty.
It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of that bigger picture. But I think Thiel's book reminds us that we have agency, like we have the power to shape the future.
Absolutely. And it starts with asking those big questions, the ones that challenge our assumptions and push us to think differently. And then being willing to embrace the unknown, right? Take risks, experiment, fail, and then learn from those failures.
It's all part of that journey from 0 to 1.
Exactly.
Well, we hope this deep dive into 0 to 1 has given you all some food for thought, some new perspectives to chew on, maybe even some inspiration to go out there and create something new, something valuable.
Yeah. Something that takes us all from 0 to 1. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.